I would like to start with the main couple, the relationship between Josh and Lindsay, Oscar Isaac and Carey Mulligan. They are our millennial couple. I found this relationship to be incredibly triggering because I think they write the fights that the couple gets into extremely well. Albeit it was a very heightened version, I do feel that the fight, you could immediately see that there was a long history with this couple, and there was a lot of pain and a lot of love and a lot of regret all wrapped up into this fight that happens and sets the premise of the show. And the first scene, which is their major fight that, sets everything up, you see two people bringing up multiple things that have happened over the years together. And I think this is such an important choice in the script because we all know what it's like when you get into a fight with your partner and you love to bring up things that they've done in the past as a way to kind of set your moral high ground. It's something that Jeffrey and I have been working on when we're trying really hard to not bring up old things or stuff that they've done in the past that we've then worked through or forgiven as a way to, act superior or throw it back in their face. Because it's really unfair to bring yourself back to something that you've already worked through and accepted. And you can't really use that as ammunition in an argument. But we all do it. And I think this scene specifically really showed that. And in an interview with Carey Mulligan and Oscar Isaac, when they were talking about how they were shooting this scene, Carey was really struggling to move from the point of the fight where she gets to a point in the fight where she ends up throwing a glass of wine. So she throws the glass at the wall. And she just wasn't finding that there was a line in the script that was really her making her feel like it was authentic for her to throw that glass. Like, what is going to drive her to have that visceral anger just to throw the glass across the wall? And it was feeling really forced. So they huddled with the director and with the creator. I always get confused because Lee, I think, directed some of the episodes too, who's the creator and the writer. So I should check when what episodes he's directed. But they started to dive, I know that they huddled with Lee at this stage. So they started to dive further into the reason behind the fight. And they came to this line that Carey says, which really unlocked it all for them. And the line is, "You've wasted my whole life." That is it's visceral. And that was the key that unlocked the anger behind their argument. And when she starts throwing the glass and she grabs his golf club and she's destroying his office. And this is when Oscar is trying to pull the golf club back from her and the younger couple looks in and sees it because it looks like he's about to hit her with the golf club. And that line, "You've wasted my life," is just so powerful. And you could feel that anger of looking at this person and realizing you've wasted all this time with them and just how awful that feeling is. And I just felt it was so incredibly well written. And what a cool discovery to have on set when you're trying to figure out what is going to make this fight so authentic. And you have this freedom there to discuss it with the creator and Oscar and finding that line that really breaks through everything. But I found the relationship between these two characters was just so nuanced. And when I went back and rewatched that first fight scene, you really see that there's so many lines. And when I mentioned the things that they're throwing back in each other's faces, when you finish the show, you learn more about what these lines mean and the triggers behind them. So when you're first watching it, you're just like, whoa, they're going at each other. But then as you start to understand who these people are, you realize how pointed these kind of insults are. So for example, Josh makes a comment about, "Thank God we never had kids." And that really sets Lindsay off even further because you can see that's such a deep trigger for her because I think they had tried to have kids and you find out that she had a miscarriage. So again, it's just like a stab in the wound. And then she makes a comment because Josh was saying how amazing their life is. We're friends with all these interesting CEOs and billionaires and amazing people. Hell, we went to lunch with Bono last week. And Lindsay goes, "They aren't our friends. We're their employees. We work for them. They are not your friends." Which again was, I think, a really interesting line because it ties into the last episode when you kind of do see that ultimately a lot of these people that they're surrounded with that Josh thinks are his friends are not his friends. And ultimately his dream is, I think, to be one of these people, but he is and still will always be an employee to them. He has a service to offer. So it's so vicious, this fight, but there's just so many elements of realism here. And, I have been in fights with Jeffrey, and there's something I'm really not proud to admit, that I can get really vicious in the things I say. And I do it as a way to try and elicit a response. And that's something that I'm trying to work on and figure out kind of where it came from. It's something I've brought to therapy. I can get really vicious and say really mean things. And I really don't like that about myself. And I don't mean those things. And it's honestly was hard. It's hard to even say right now on the podcast, because it's that's a really intimate part of myself that saying out loud is just not something that you always want to share. But these parts of ourselves that we really bury, I think often our partners are the ones who get that raw version of us, and they are visible to these parts that we bury. And I think in this scene, there was just such a raw version of so much pain and so much hurt, and what happens when that pain and hurt is not being worked on. So the show opens with this fight, and then I think I'd like to talk about their relationship further and actually how the show ends. So you open with this fight. The show continues on as you learn more about their relationship, and then the show ends. And it ends with one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen on television. It brought me to tears. Skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to hear this, because this is how the show ends. But Josh's character is being arrested for money laundering, which throughout the show you realize is kind of the premise of where all of this is going in terms of actually what's going on behind the scenes. He's taken the fall to protect Lindsay, and they're in Korea at this stage. There's a lot of how we got here, but essentially he's like, I'm not going to let her take the fall. I'm going to take it. And he's being escorted out of the building that they were in, and Lindsay's out in the crowd, and she sees him being arrested. And all of a sudden she climbs over the barricade and she runs to him. And there's this incredible piece of music playing that's super synthy and dark and just so powerful. And it was written by Phineas, who did the score for the show. And I'm going to talk about the music in a little bit soon. He sent this piece of music to the director, and the entire last scene was built around this song. So the scene shows Lindsay running to Josh as he's being escorted out and arrested, and she kisses him, and they have this deep, passionate kiss, just saying how much they love each other. And you can just feel the passion, and you see so much love, which is such a contrast to the first episode with so much hate and visceral hate to just deep, deep, deep love. And she's saying she's going to be there for him. She's sorry. She'll wait for him. Because I think ultimately these people do have deep love for one another, and they just have not worked through their shit. And it's just so sad to see how their shit has just ultimately destroyed them. And in an interview with Oscar and Carey, Oscar said something really interesting, which just sat with me. And he said, when you really allow yourself to feel the full love of somebody, that's usually called grief. That just, it really affected me, because the full spectrum of love is also grief. And when you lose somebody, you open yourself up to feeling the full tide of what that love is, and what the full tide of the human being and who they are. And I think in that moment, Lindsay is realizing she is losing Josh. And that's when she realized, and he realized, how much they actually really love each other. So the arc of this relationship was incredible and so freaking well written. This is just two things I'm talking about, the beginning and the end. And they are very unlikable, and they are selfish, but it is very truthful, which I really appreciated. And then finally, as I wrap up my review, I had to acknowledge the music. So the creator, Lee Sung-jin, said he created a playlist of 800 songs he listens to inspire the music. Again, as I mentioned, Lee is a millennial through and through. He's the same age as Jeffrey, and he really lent into the millennial experience for many references throughout the show. But the music really stuck with those millennial bangers. It really reminded me from my college years. They had music from Hot Chip, Tame Impala, Daft Punk, M83, Midnight Sun, shout out, love that song, Phoenix. And he worked with Phineas, Billie Eilish's brother, who scored the show and wrote incredibly moving original music. And the song that really stuck with me that was an original that Phineas wrote is called Vicious Thoughts. It's dark, it's moody, it's filled with these like deep synths, which I feel like was such a kind of, so many of the bands were using synths at that time. And it reminded me so much of the music from that time, but it brought just this like huge emotion to the closing scene. And I think I had mentioned to you this closing scene is really going to stick with me forever, because apparently what happened is the song was made, and I think I mentioned this at the start, but I just want to reiterate it a little more. So Phineas made this song, he sent it to Lee, not sure where they'd use it, and Lee was like, this is how the show's going to end. Like, I don't care how we get here. This is the emotional core of the show, and everything has to lead to this song. And the song really led his writing to close the show. And I just thought that must be such a cool way to write, is you know this song and you're like, I want the show to end on this song, so I will make my writing work towards this beat. And you really see how it paid off, because the scene is just so emotional, so beautiful, so heart-wrenching. And I'll just watch it over and over again, and I will consistently listen to that song because it is so, so good.